All right, hey everyone, we are now live with this Ask Me Anything about Photon and Databrick SQL. I'm Kelly, I'm going to be moderating this session. Please go ahead, put any and all questions that y'all have in our chat. We're going to address as many as we can in the next 30 minutes. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our panel to go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex, and I'm the tech lead on Photon. I'm happy to tell you anything about it.
Hi there, I'm Alistair McGowan, a solutions architect, and I help customers get up and running and familiar with the platform.
Hi, my name is Mustafa. I'm the tech lead for performance at runtime performance at Databricks.
Hi there, Miranda Luna. I'm the PM for Databrick SQL UI.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Again, please feel free to put any and all of your questions in the chat. I'm going to start off with a question from Miranda, actually. Miranda, this morning, Reynold had a little bit of a talk about Databrick SQL. This Databrick SQL used to be called SQL Analytics, from my understanding. Can you maybe explain the change that happened there and what this means?
Yeah, definitely. So what you're going to see when you log in and navigate to the SQL tab today is the same product you know and love. So nothing has fundamentally changed in terms of taking anything away or pivoting kind of what you've already had set up. But one thing we wanted to make sure that we could really highlight was that there are kind of several components that go along with Databrick SQL, right? There's the endpoint component. So I can use my SQL endpoint with my Tableau dashboards. I can use Power BI. I can use any sort of additional client I'd like to. But there's also the experience of I want to actually build a redash dashboard. I want to schedule alerts. I want to kind of integrate those queries and visualizations into different views. And we want to be able to distinguish those because we do know that there are certainly customers that are using one or the other and not necessarily both. And we want to be able to speak to and provide kind of a tailored offering and experience for those who might just be using one or the other. So that's kind of what's behind the name change. Databricks SQL, still the same SQL analytics you know and love. But Databricks SQL specifically referring to kind of that endpoints experience and hooking into other BI tools. Whereas, you know, the redash is going to be your classic dashboarding, queries, visualizations.
Thanks for that. And then because we're also talking about Photon, I want to start us off with another question for Alex. Alex, can you just level set for us? What is Photon and how does it differ from Spark?
Yeah, sure. So Photon is a new execution engine that's completely built from scratch, written in C++. That means that it replaces the execution portions of Spark, and to gain a lot more efficiency, basically to use the underlying hardware more efficiently. And this is for in terms of our vision, this is supposed to help accelerate all kinds of workloads from ETL to SQL, as well as sort of BI-style queries. But overall, the idea is really to replace the core execution engine and just drive more efficiency to provide, better value for kind of the cloud machines that you're getting for us to utilize the underlying hardware better. And so Photon uses a certain well-known technique from database engines, which is called vectorization. It's a certain way of kind of structuring the engine to gain more kind of efficiency out of the low-level hardware. Basically, it's more friendly to how modern CPUs work. You can do batching of the data and kind of crunch through the data in a more efficient way. And it's also written from scratch in C++ to kind of remove some of the performance shackles that we've had running in the JVM.
And then I think you actually addressed this, but just to make it super explicit, we had a question coming in, is Photon only for SQL or can it be used for Scala as well? For example, the data frame or dataset API or UDFs?
Yeah, so the Photon engine is fully compatible with a data frame API as well as the SQL API. Yeah, it currently does not support UDFs natively, but that said, the Photon engine is built in a way that, from a user's point of view, you don't really have to change your code to take advantage of the Photon engine. Operations that are supported in Photon natively can run in Photon, and other operations within the same query that are not supported by Photon will fall back to the old engine. So it's kind of transparent to the user. You can submit a single job or query, And parts of the query may run in the old engine, and parts of it may run in the new engine. So even if some parts of it are not supported, you can still kind of make use of that. And there's no change required from your side. It's kind of this falling back is transparent to the user. If you want to kind of see which parts of the query can be accelerated by Photon, you can look at the explain plan. It will basically show you which parts of the query can run and which parts will fall back to the current Spark engine.
It's actually then another good follow-up question that I see here. Can you use the Spark UI with Photon then?
You can, yes. Yeah, you can use the Spark UI to kind of look at your Photon queries, and you can look at the individual operators. We provide a kind of rich set of metrics for you to understand performance. In the Spark UI itself, we even highlight the parts of the plan that can run with Photon, so they have a different color. So very quickly, like, you can visually see which parts, run in the Photon versus the Spark engine.
Awesome. And then I have a kind of general follow-up question. This is for anyone. Is there any time or any reason why I wouldn't want to use Photon in conjunction with this Databrick SQL offering?
So for the Databrick SQL offering, I do think by default Photon is the best choice, because it based on our experience, it does provide a superior efficiency for these use cases. That said, Photon is a completely it's a new engine, completely written from scratch, and there may be certain types of operations that aren't supported yet, or certain query patterns that maybe we haven't optimized for yet. So there is the possibility of kind of a falling back to the existing engine in edge cases, or in kind of extreme scenarios where many of the operations aren't supported by Photon yet. But in general, we'd recommend Photon as the default engine for Databrick SQL. We have a very broad. We feel pretty good about the feature coverage and the performance we're offering.
Awesome. And then I just got our first performance question. Some things in general, what workloads do we expect Photon to help with? What kind of speedups do we expect with this new engine?
So Photon is intended to speed up CPU-bound operations, basically operations where we're spending a lot of time processing data, which is one of the main reasons why, when you're looking at Spark, which is mostly written in Scala and Java, we identified some inefficiencies where basically we end up spending a lot more time while the system is busy processing. And basically in the cloud, time is money. So the faster we process things, the more efficient Databricks will be, and the more value we're adding to our customers. So Photon is primarily focused on making CPU-intensive operations more efficient. At the same time, we're making improvements across the stack, basically while reading data, especially while reading a large number of small files. So quite often users would write data to partition tables, or tables that are bucketed, or would have some kind of like trickle ingestion that will create a large number of small files. So as of late, we've been working on making this read path that has to deal with a large number of small files very, very efficiently. And we're also working on fine-tuning this prefetching operation across clouds. So Databricks runs on GCP, runs on Azure, and runs on AWS. So for each one of these clouds, we went and did the experiments to understand how they behave, and we're tuning Databricks to run the best on each one of those. Also, at the same time, we've been making improvements for data extraction. So we have a new feature called Cloud Fetch, where basically if we're querying a large amount of data from Databricks, the system will actually write it out to the object store, and then the ODBC or JDBC client will be reading it by multiple threads. And from what we've seen, this is tremendously useful, especially when we're doing extracts into BI tools like Power BI and Tableau.
And then I'm getting a lot of Photon-based questions. This one is, does Photon work in conjunction with adaptive query execution?
It does, yes. It should provide, I believe, as of today, all of the adaptive execution features are supported in Photon as well. Yeah. So yes. And we have tested it, on the standard benchmarks like TBCDS, and I think many of the numbers we report actually reflect running with adaptive execution on.
Awesome. And then I have pretty much a yes/no question for y'all. Is Photon just a part of Databricks SQL, or is it also going to be part of the Databricks runtime with Scala notebooks as well?
Yeah, that's great. Photon will actually be available on both, and they will both, be publicly available as public preview in the coming weeks. So both for Databricks SQL and for the, regular Databricks clusters.
Perfect. And that actually answers that follow-up question I just got too, is when will this be available for everyone to try out? All right, I do have a question then about Databricks SQL. This might be more for our solution architects or product managers on the line. What have you seen use cases so far on Databricks SQL, formerly known as Databricks Analytics, for anyone who has used it in the past?
Alistair, do you want to speak to some of your customers?
Absolutely. So what I'm mostly finding is there's a growing segment of people that either don't want to wait for their data to be curated, pushed into a warehouse, and they need to get basically access to the whole data in the lake. But the problem is, traditionally with a notebook interface, it's not a very SQL analyst friendly tool. So, first time I ever saw a notebook, it didn't make any sense to me. I didn't know what to put in there. With the query editor, being able to look at basically your data catalog on the left, input some SQL at the top, get your results, add some visualizations, it's a much more natural way to do it. So it's been a really good area for those SQL analysts to be able to go and operate. Additionally, you get some of those extra performance benefits and ease of management. It's really simple to set up an endpoint and use an endpoint. So being able to hook your third-party BI tools up to that endpoint is a better experience for your users and your administrators compared to a traditional all-purpose cluster. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Miranda?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head that this is the best way to kind of get data exposed to Tableau, Power BI, or if you want to do some quick analysis, exploratory right within Databricks, you're all set and ready to go.
Awesome. And then I'm getting a lot of questions about Photon again. Seems like that's the exciting part here. We will follow up to our question about performance. Are you benchmarking against things like data warehouses? This question points out here that performance is a really important part of a lakehouse. So what kind of benchmarking is being done? How is that being approached?
Definitely. So basically, as we go and develop Databricks and develop Spark and Photon and so on, we try to understand what are the customer needs in terms of like efficiency, throughput, scalability, and so on. And with the new features that we're building, like Photon, we're able to match or beat state-of-the-art data warehouses that are out there in the market in terms of like CPU, in terms of efficiency. At the same time, our offerings tend to have significantly better price performance. Also, as we do these comparisons, we compare them in two different ways. The first way is basically taking a data warehouse and storing the data natively in the data warehouse. And in these scenarios, we're able to perform better and have significantly better price performance than these other traditional data warehouse. At the same time, we have a significantly bigger advantage when we're querying data that's actually in the data lake. So Databricks natively separates compute and storage. You could spin up as much compute as needed. Storage will be like in S3 in DLS or in Google file system. And we have this ability to separate compute and storage for a long time. And this is how Databricks operates natively. And we do this on Delta, which is an open source file format. While these other systems significantly struggle when they're reading things like Parquet and ORC in the data lake. So this is where Databricks shines significantly by even sometimes the order of magnitude compared to these other systems.
That's awesome. I also want to remind everyone, please feel free, put your questions in the chat queue. We'd be glad to answer all of them. We have 15 more minutes, so we can definitely get to your questions. Another question then about Photon. Does Photon support structured streaming workloads?
Yeah, good question. So as of today, streaming isn't one area we have particularly focused on. So we've really put a lot of emphasis on supporting the operators and expressions and so on that are available in kind of SQL batch workloads. That said, we are aware that structured streaming is an important use case, and we'll definitely come back to that in the future and add support for those. Today, there are like I said, it's not that it doesn't work at all. It's just that we haven't focused on it. So there may be certain operations that, like stateful aggregations, that would need a complete reimplementation in Photon that we haven't focused on so far. That said, some of the more common use cases, like continuous merges, for example, can be made to work with Photon today.
And there's actually
there's I would say it's more like there's something that may work. It really depends on the case, but it's not an area that we have focused on so far. But we will revisit in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. That's actually time for a good follow-up about that. Would you mind telling us a little bit about then, like your teams, like where you're investing your time, what the roadmap looks like for Photon in terms of support?
Yeah, certainly. So our focus really is on expanding the feature coverage. Some of the big things that are currently not supported in the Photon engine are complex types like struct, arrays, and map. We have limited support for them, but they're not quite complete yet. Then sorting and window functions are two other operators that are not supported in the Photon engine either, but we're actively working on those. So those are on our immediate roadmap to address, hopefully within the coming quarters. UDFs is another area that where Photon will fall back to the old engine, but it's another thing that we're looking at right now. So it's really about coverage. There's in SQL there's a lot of different built-in functions, and we're kind of really closely looking at customer workloads to understand what are the commonly used operations, and we're kind of prioritizing the work, based on the workloads we're seeing. So we try to make sure that the commonly used operations are supported. One of the exciting things that we more or less completed recently, just to give you an example, is full support for date and timestamp functions. These are very, very commonly used functions, and we're kind of going through the different data types, operators, and expressions, and adding coverage one by one. So just to recap, the big ones we're focusing on in the coming quarters are sort, window, complex types, and later on UDFs.
Awesome. And then I'm going to ask one more Photon question and then jump over to Databrick SQL for a little bit. Can you maybe tell the difference between Catalyst and Photon, where they might differ, where they might interact?
Yeah, good question. They are different components of the stack. So it might be helpful for us to kind of quickly walk through the life cycle of a query to understand where the different pieces fit in. So when a query comes into the system, it first goes into the Spark driver. It gets parsed, it gets analyzed, and then goes into Catalyst, where we build an optimized execution plan. And so this remains the same for the old Spark as well as Photon. Where Photon comes in is on the physical plan produced by Catalyst, we do an additional pass over the plan to identify which of the parts are eligible to be run in Photon. And then when it comes to actually executing that plan and submitting the tasks out to the worker nodes to perform the work, that's where the Photon engine kicks in at this very last step of task execution. So in that sense, they're really complementary. Basically Catalyst produces the plan and then feeds into the Photon execution engine. And then, for adaptive execution, then we feed back into Catalyst, which kind of regenerates the plan and rephotonizes it, and so on. Yeah.
Awesome. That also answers one of the next questions that came in about, does Photon SQL have a built-in optimizer? Follow up to that, though, which is going to bridge us between Photon and Databrick SQL. The question I have is, does Photon SQL use ANSI SQL syntax? So could someone please address about how the APIs for Photon are Spark APIs and talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of our the direction or where we're kind of thinking is that now, since we really want to make SQL kind of a first-class citizen as part of the Databrick SQL offering, and that does include more standard conforming SQL syntax as well as behavior and error reporting. So that's an area that's actively being worked on, not just at Databricks, but actually in the Spark community as a whole. So we are kind of really moving towards that direction. And it also affects Photon in particular for certain, implementing certain behaviors. Just one canonical example is that, if you're doing an aggregation that may overflow, the usual, kind of ANSI SQL behaviors to fail the query, or in certain exceptional situations, you fail the query. Whereas historically, Spark has been more forgiving, I think, and it would, null the result or something like that. So, being more standard conforming is certainly an active area of development, I would say. Yeah.
Awesome. And then because we are spending so much time on Photon, I want to jump over to Databrick SQL for just the instant. I asked Alex a little bit about his team's focus on the next few quarters or so for Photon. Miranda, would you mind talking a little bit about what's coming up for Databrick SQL and what's that looking like in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're going to see is a few different investment areas for us, and hopefully that'll align with a bit of what you heard in Reynolds' keynote this morning. First and foremost, we do want to make sure we're investing in performance. We want to make sure that compute is readily available, it's fast to start. You shouldn't be waiting multiple tens of seconds or minutes to start an endpoint. We want to make sure that if that's kind of a key use case, that we're servicing that, as well as kind of exactly what Reynolds was talking about in the keynote today. We want to continue to improve performance with higher number of concurrent users over small data, over poorly organized data. We also really want to, as a second area of emphasis, improve the onboarding experience. So if you're a net new customer for Databrick SQL, we want to make sure that you're able to get started very quickly, very easily, onboard your data, give the correct permissions to users, understand what you need to do in order to administrate kind of that area of the Databricks experience. Thirdly, this is also something Reynolds and John touched on in the keynote today, but we want to make sure we're really building kind of a first-class query editor and experience when you kind of want to actually work with your data and extract some insights. So you're going to see those investments that were previewed today, like the tabbed editor with better autocomplete, improved schema browsing, a lot of kind of like little productivity shortcuts, like you saw John mention that, or John demo, that you could just kind of click and get that immediate select 50, like a quick view of your data. Those sorts of improvements will kind of continue to be a focus area for us. And then last but certainly not least, like we were able to incorporate a wonderful technology from kind of a company that was joined the Databricks portfolio called Redash. Provides an awesome experience in terms of dashboarding today, but we want to make sure that we're able to kind of bolster that a bit more, whether that's through additional visualizations, or that's through allowing for kind of conditional formatting of those visualizations, a more flexible layout type, improving the alert experience, and kind of the integration into different parts of your workflows. So those, I'd say, are going to be the 4 areas you're going to see us really place an emphasis on in the coming quarters.
Awesome. And then a follow-up question, a little bit of question I have around SQL Analytics functionality. Sounds like with Redash, we have this great SQL editor or SQL UI. What about connections for things like drag and drop BI tools? How would something like that work?
How would I connect my SQL endpoint in Databricks SQL to a different?
So maybe something like a Power BI or Tableau or something like that.
Yep. So we obviously provide a query editor out of the box in Databricks SQL. We provide like a dashboarding experience, which is great. But we also know that we have plenty of customers who are already using Tableau. That's just kind of their system of record for reporting. We have plenty of customers that are using Power BI. That's their system of record. We don't want to kind of upend the apple cart. We want to make sure they can bring the data to the kind of pane of glass through which they want to view it. So we've actually built very specific connectors with a number of different BI tools, certainly Tableau and Power BI included, but you kind of saw the wall of logos that Reynolds spoke to earlier today. We're certainly going to continue to make sure that experience is as snappy as possible. We have a number of customers who go from the direction of, running extracts. We have other customers who want to do live query. Regardless of what decision a customer wants to make in terms of how they make that data available to that BI tool, we're going to be focusing kind of under that performance umbrella on making sure that that's going to be as snappy of an experience as possible, that there aren't going to be delays encountered in that.
And then a question I just got actually following up on that. Are there any plans within Databricks to add a GUI-based approach to Databricks SQL?
Can whoever asked about that click down on what specifically they'd like to see come online?
I'll keep an eye out and then follow up about that. Perfect. One more question then about Databricks SQL before I jump back over to Photon. Can someone tell me a little bit about what kind of security and governance controls does Databricks SQL offer now?
Sure. So today you're going to see a number of different controls for an admin who needs to ensure that there's only kind of the right users and groups accessing the right data set. Over time, what you're going to see is kind of that Unity catalog kind of synchronized with the efforts that we're making under Databrick SQL. So that kind of major investment in terms of governance is going to be something that raises the water level in DB SQL as well. But today, certainly, if you're an admin, you have that same control over users and groups in terms of what data they can access. If you are creating a query or a dashboard within Databrick SQL, you have the power to kind of determine whether another user can run that dashboard or that query as yourself and receive the same kind of results that you are, so that they don't open a dashboard and get totally blank charts. Or you can say run it with your own credentials, and you can also share kind of can run, can view permissions, can edit permissions, and we'll be kind of enhancing that as time goes on.
Awesome. And then there's been quite a few follow-ups to that discussion on like the Photon versus Catalyst, how they interact. I have a question about the Tungsten engine now. Is Photon just a better version of Tungsten? Where's that differentiated information about that there?
Good question. I would say, to a first approximation, yes, you can think of it as you can think of Photon as a replacement for the Tungsten engine. To a first approximation, I think that is correct. Tungsten is more based on the idea of runtime code generation, whereas Photon is more based on the idea of vectorization, and also kind of runs native code instead of inside the JVM, with kind of all the benefits and kind of more access to the lower level features that brings.
And then another Photon question, have you investigated anything like hardware acceleration to speed up Spark? And if so, what are some specific areas that you've been looking into?
Yeah, the discussion of specialized hardware, I think it's certainly an interesting area to look at. As of now, we don't see it as necessarily being the best solution in terms of price performance for what our customers are looking at. But that said, if this it's a space where we're actively looking at and seeing whether the balance will eventually shift towards providing more competitive price performance.
And then I also asked for Databrick SQL. How has that been seen in the field? Where are we seeing customers start to use it? I want to ask the same question then for Photon engine. Where are we seeing that in the field now? It's been out in preview for a little bit. What kind of speed ups are we seeing, or performance boosts have we been seeing in the field?
So basically, customers have been seeing great improvements with regards to specifically speed up and the reduction in overall cost. So in many cases, customers, they look at recurring ETL pipelines that run for a long periods of time, that are ingesting and writing large amounts of data. So typically, when they migrate these, or even migrate their standard analytics workloads to Photon, they see a very big reduction in overall response time, which is essential to make sure the business is running on time, and a big improvement in price performance. The speed up varies anywhere between 2x up to an order of magnitude. And also, like what Photon offers is improvements to processing of the data and how we write the data as well. So with Photon, we also have a C++, more efficient C++ implementation of the Parquet writer, which is significantly faster than the current Spark one.
Awesome. So this is everyone's last chance to get in any last minute questions. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. We are at the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone for coming to this Ask Me Anything. I also really want to thank all of our panelists for all of the great answers. These are two things that I'm very excited about someone who works in the field. I've seen these in practice. They are awesome. Hope everyone enjoys their next 2 days of Summit, and have a great rest of your evening, everyone.